What we would like to do now is we're switching gears from transportation and modes of transportation to the building scale. And before I start doing some formal introductions of our panel and myself, I just want to frame the topic around this panel discussion that we're starting. In the year of 2050, it's anticipated that we will have over 30 megacities with populations exceeding 20 million people. At the same time, the built environment in these megacities will increase at an unprecedented rate. And I believe we have seen some very striking images in the earlier presentations. It appears that the optimization of building performance will be a core focus for architects and engineers in the future. A variety of building technology advances have been developed worldwide. So we're able to do the net zero water, net zero energy, the net zero waste building. Those are being developed now and they're being executed. So what we are holding for the future are actually carbon neutral and energy plus construction types. And those are the labels that will probably mark the next generation of our buildings in our cities. That are buildings that will generate energy instead of using it. So this is the topic of this panel discussion where we want to focus on environmental and building technologies. And we want to do this along 4 individual cities, them being Chicago, Helsinki, Sao Paulo, and Masdar. But before we do this, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Christoph Janssen. I'm an architect. I have a practice in Los Angeles. And I have the privilege to be the iCares Professor of Practice at Washington University in St. Louis. And I'm part of the International Center for Advanced Renewable Energy and Sustainability, which is a university-wide initiative at WashU. So with this, I would like to introduce our panel. I think we have a very interesting group of people here. We have an architect, we have an engineer and scientist, and we have an urban designer and landscape architect, and we have an engineer. So I think we have an interesting group of people, and we will see a variety of different perspectives along the cities that each of the panelists will be discussing. But just a few brief words on the person next to me, Gordon Gill. He's a founding partner of Adrian Smith and Gordon Gill Architecture in Chicago. Gordon's work includes the design of the world's first net zero energy skyscraper, which is the Pearl River Tower. And he's also responsible for the world's first large positive energy building, which is the Masdar headquarters building. I was very intrigued by a publication by Gordon's office called Towards Zero Carbon, which is a comprehensive and integrated plan to decarbonize an area in Chicago called the Loop, which is a central corridor in the city center of Chicago. So I'm sure we're going to hear more about this a little bit later. Then we have Fabio Maurice Gonzalez from Sao Paulo. He's an urban designer and landscape architect, and he's also a professor for urban design and landscape architecture at the University of Sao Paulo. What's interesting about Fabio is, for one, the location where he's working and practicing. And we probably will hear some of the work that has done with his peers and with his students in the development of new urban strategy as it relates to saving and restoring Sao Paulo's unique landscape, ecosystem, biodiversity. Then we have Eric Olsen from New York. He is a partner at TrendSolar Engineering. TrendSolar is known for high-performance, climate-oriented building design solutions. TrendSolar has also been involved in the development of the Masdar City Master Plan in Abu Dhabi, and Eric will start talking about this a little bit later. And Masdar City is the first new city development of its kind meant to achieve a carbon neutral footprint. I also would like to mention that Eric also was the director of the Green Building Program with the City of Chicago, so he also brings a unique perspective as it relates to policy and city governance. And then finally, we have Johanna Kierkinen here. She's the director of the Ecological Sustainability Department at Sitra, and Sitra is the Finnish Innovation Fund. She's a researcher and engineer. I learned that yesterday. And she has a prime focus on advancing the quality of Finland's building environments. And she was responsible between 2009 and 2012 as she directed Finland's new energy program, which is a strong focus on energy efficient building strategies. And part of her work, which we hear about a little bit later, is the development of the Low 2NO, a decarbonization plan of a inner city block in the city center of Helsinki. So, but let's start with our focus on Chicago. Gordon, your firm's publication Towards Zero Carbon, which I mentioned, is a visionary story about the city of Chicago, the way I read it, to become the greenest in America and a world leader in energy efficiency and reducing carbon emissions. Can you tell us about the vision you have for the city of Chicago?
Sure. Can you hear me okay if I speak at this level back there? Okay, great. I think I'm going to back up for a second and start with the story that caused us to do that book. Our firm is 6 years old. We started it in 2006. And as Christoph said, we were pretty lucky to have done some pretty significant building designs, and we continue to do those as architects. The idea behind those buildings are really to improve the quality of the environments within those buildings and around those buildings and the impact that they have. I think what we haven't said yet maybe is the impact that buildings have on carbon emissions, approximately 3 times worse than automobiles. And although the attention is always there, you see it on TV commercials every day, that little footprint or that little note is not necessarily broadcast at a high level. So, you know, we occupy them, we live in them, they're everywhere we go, and they're probably the worst things that we could propagate. So guilty as charged. However, I think that we have a responsibility to improve their performance, specifically their embedded carbon footprint and that manufacturing process that leads us to build in a certain way. And when we started the firm, we got asked to design a net zero hotel in Chicago, adjacent to the Sears Tower, or what is now called the Willis Tower. We said no, because the economics around that particular idea weren't valid. But what we were very interested in was the tower itself, the Willis Tower. And because it was the same client on the same parcel, we wanted to understand what the existing building could offer the new building. Could we bring the new building online with no impact to the grid and at the same time improve the quality of the existing building? And we proved that we could. We took 68 million kilowatt hours out of that tower, the equivalent of something like 20,000 single-family homes in the neighborhood around it. And the new building only needed 25% of that savings. So the question was, what do we do with the other 75%? Where does it go? What's it worth to the owners, to the city, to ComEd? What is that savings worth? And we found out rather quickly that it was extremely valuable, not just in terms of offsetting carbon, but in terms of the investments that were being made in those buildings. So then we decided to try to understand how we could expand this idea of systems within a building and look at the city as a whole, not just as parts, but as an integrated, what I call ecosystem. We have built ourselves probably the most significant barrier reefs ever, and now we're trying to figure out what to do with them. So at the time, the city had signed up for the 2030 challenge, reduction of 39 million metric tons of carbon. We wanted to know how to do that. How are we really going to achieve that in that time? And we didn't understand it, to be honest. We couldn't figure it out. So we decided to do this book. We took 25 people. We took the area called the Loop, which is inside the river and the L tracks downtown, 450 buildings, about 20 million square feet, and we documented every single one of them. We went out, we thermally imaged them, we categorized them by use, by era. We looked at their facades, how they were built, how the programs had changed. The full gambit of that analysis is in a 280-page document that we published. And what we found out was that there were no necessarily linear patterns of building behavior. Just because they were newer doesn't mean they were better. Just because they were older didn't mean they were bad. And what we found was the interconnectedness between all things that come together to make a city were critical in defining the path towards lower carbon. So the relationship between transit, building density, use, for us in our particular case, we have a heavy office core, very little residential. Residential uses about 25% of the energy that an office building does, so mixed use is very critical. Education and walkability of the downtown core to decrease traffic. And at the end, we found out that we could increase density by 50% and decrease carbon by 25%. And although these statistics and these numbers all sound like an accounting of how to make things work, the true purpose of what we're trying to do is improve the quality of life in the city. And it is the quality that I think is the most elusive, because as far as technology is concerned, we could build a $2.5 billion wind farm or a $2 billion solar farm and take the entire core off the grid. And we wouldn't have touched one single design issue inside that core. So what we're finding and what we're most interested in are the things that I think everyone is talking about today, is really how we live, how we improve the quality of our lives, especially for us in our American cities, where we're not necessarily looking at increased population and migration. In some cases, they're decreasing. So what do we do with the 99%, 97% of existing building stock that we have? And the way I look at it is to basically tap into the latent potential of that stock, reposition the real estate as a valuable asset through its energy, and then recreate an environment that is not just hopefully a better policy, better designed place to live, but an economically viable solution to cities that are not necessarily growing at a rapid rate. I'll leave it with that for now.
Yeah, yeah. To this point of that you're making, Gordon, that we're all basically striving for a better urban living environment. Right. And I live in Los Angeles. I have a background in Europe, and I also spend time in St. Louis. And all of these urban experiences are quite different. And Johanna, the way I understand CITRA as a national, government-funded organization trying to pursue strategies that create systemic change in the real estate, construction, design environment. This is something that will change the entire demographics of the building industry in your country. Maybe you can talk a little bit about Helsinki and what kind of changes this program that you're working in is showing for Helsinki.
Absolutely, thank you. So my name is Johanna Kierkinen and I work for CITRA as a senior lead, and currently actually we have fixed term programs Currently, I'm leading a team and working with the project that we are creating a model that we want to increase this kind of like regional resource efficiency. So we are moving towards like from energy efficiency towards more comprehensive approach. But a few words about Sitra. So Sitra is actually an independent fund. We were established in 1967. It was this kind of like Finland's anniversary gift to itself to establish a fund that promotes Finland's future and well-being. And currently, our vision is that Finland will be a forerunner in sustainable well-being, and with the sustainable well-being we mean all three aspects of sustainable development, so the social, economic, and ecological. And we are actually, it's great that we can be independent, so we are acting and we have those programs and projects, we are funding them from the interests of our endowment capital. So last 5 years, Sitra has been working a lot with energy efficient built environments, so we have been funding a lot of projects. For example, the first zero energy buildings in Finland, and it's not that easy to do zero energy buildings in Finland. And also we have been generating tools for energy efficient master planning. We also had a lot of projects with energy efficient renovation, and that's also really not that easy. And also about sustainable lifestyles. And yes, actually Finland, we 1/3 of our energy production is produced with renewable energy, but still we have like really huge carbon footprint. I think the US carbon footprint and Finland's carbon footprint is quite similar level. And built environment, why we did concentrate on that one, because the buildings, construction and transportation, they actually consist like the 60% of energy produced, consumed in Finland, and approximately nearly 60% of carbon emission produced. So built environment really has like large impact. And some projects I want to introduce. The one is this low to no block development in Helsinki. So some few years ago we put up this kind of international competition, and we wanted to choose this kind of like really cross-sectoral and team to develop this kind of a block that would promote sustainable development in all its three aspects. And we chose a team of Arup, Sauerbruch-Hutton and Experientia, and they made this kind of like proposal of called Sea Life, City as Living Factory of Ecology. And this proposal especially promoted the sustainable lifestyles. So actually when I was telling that, okay, built environment, that it's consuming energy 60% and producing emissions, it's actually us who are there and consuming that energy. We are doing the choices and we are driving the car or anything. It's not the buildings who are actually consuming that energy. So and actually there's some pictures from that project there. So there was also like how the block can actually bring opportunities to, for example, local produced food. Could be there be some kind of like gardening there, and some shops that could provide like locally and closely produced food. How the transportation would be actually designed that it would actually promote this kind of like the walking and the bicycling. Could there be some kind of like common laundry instead of like everybody would have their own washing machine? Could there be some kind of like common sauna instead of like in Finland, unfortunately, like many people have like their own sauna in their apartments, so that's also
nice.
Yeah, it's nice. But it's not that ecological. And this project brought up like several things that we actually like pushed forward in Finland. One was wood construction, because like Finland, there's a lot of wood out there, but we don't use it with buildings that much, unfortunately. We used to in the old days, but then the concrete came and But wood, it sequestrates carbon, so it would be like really like, and it would bring a lot of jobs for the rural areas especially. So we actually like pushed forward this kind of like wood construction in Finland. So at the moment there are like more than 600 modern apartments made from wood, and they are in planning phase. There are more than 7,000 apartments. So and we also like changed this kind of like the fire codes for wood buildings as well. So now it's possible to build like multi-story wood buildings. And also with this low to no block development, when we were making all this kind of like energy analysis, it actually came true that in Finland, in the cities, we have this district heating. So it's actually the best way to get the energy content out of the fuel. And actually in Finland, we have this climate panel that there are like 8 professors for different universities from Finland, and they made statements, and they all just like brought up like district heating in cities and in this kind of like densely populated area is the best way to produce the heat and power. And actually there's this one picture in the middle that you can see the big power plant in Helsinki, and actually the picture is taken from our office, the roof of our office. So that's something perhaps like Finland could really help like other cities to work on. But unfortunately, there's still we have also lessons to do. For example, in Helsinki, we are using coal for that heat and power production, but they are currently studying like how could we replace the coal with wood chips and pellets. So that's actually in progress. And also PVs. So in Finland, there's usually this kind of ideas that solar power is not feasible. But actually, the solar gain in Finland is the same as in northern Germany. But this is also like this was like huge campaigning that we have had to do, and a lot of like work with doing that. That actually like solar is very, very good in Finland as well. But it's kind of like this is the mindset, like people think like no, it's not good. But that's what we have been working, and this kind of like self-produced energy, and we still are a lot to do with that. And I think like we have a lot to learn from you with that one. Also, we developed this kind of like smart systems and are developing that how could you better like could follow your carbon footprint, and you would better know like where does it consist of. And also one development in Helsinki that this low to no block and sustainable lifestyles brought up was this kind of like pop-up culture. We have a few times in a year we have this restaurant day. So one day anybody could set up a restaurant, and then you have this kind of like open map, and you can go and see like where do you want to go, and you can actually go somebody's home and they will cook to you. And this kind of like nice culture around the cities. And they have also this kind of like cleaning day as well. So one day you can put up this kind of like flea market next to your apartment, and anybody can do it. And it's really like making this kind of like urban living really nice and making like opportunities. Okay, just shortly, 2 other projects I wanted to talk about. One, like related to this energy efficient built environment. We have a national action plan called ERA 17, and we were funding that together with the Ministry of Environment and Tekes, that is the Finnish funding agency for technology. And we actually, during 1 year, we invited 30 experts to think about like what are the ways and what kind of policies we need in Finland, what kind of actions that we could actually gain that 20% carbon reduction by 2020 already in 2017 when it's Finland's 100th anniversary celebration. And they put up 31 different actions in new buildings, renewable energy, in master planning, and education, and so on, that we can actually do it. And the best thing in this action plan is that it's really followed up, that we will do those actions. And then the next thing that we are doing is this resource efficiency. So I think it's really important, even though we're now talking about energy efficiency a lot, I think we need to go towards this more comprehensive approaches. And I think because economy is also something we are discussing here today, so I think this kind of like resource efficiency is bringing more economic opportunities, and it's a mindset that it's like finding opportunities, how can we gain more with less? And I think we need to find tools, how to visualize different kind of resource flows in the cities, for example. But yes, that's what I have to say now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, I think hopefully we can come back to this one point that you were making regarding, maybe you can call it government control over how we deal with our environments as a means to control what's being built in the future. But let's maybe move from Europe to South America and Sao Paulo. And we know that Sao Paulo, as we have seen in the earlier pictures, and I think we don't want to really more on this, but I think there's some very troubling problems that are showing in Sao Paulo regarding environmental issues as it relates to the ecology and the biodiversity of this very specific location. So, Fabio, I was wondering if you could maybe explain the situation a little bit more in depth and maybe paint some of the more positive aspects of that. But also, I would be interested in knowing, is Sao Paulo, in your opinion, unique this way?
The discussion I brought today is to try to understand what a public university can do in this context. And today, in Brazil, we have more than 270 faculties of architecture. It's too many. We produce a lot of architects with low quality, but a lot of architects. And in Brazil, we don't have just one faculty of landscape design or urbanism. For us in the country, the same professional architect is in the same time urbanist, landscape architecture, and building architect. So we don't have enough time in the graduation to discuss deeply the subject like urban design, landscape design, and what you need to discuss to build better cities and to try to move the society to understand our subjects, our questions. Today, São Paulo is the fourth city in the country, in the world, in investments. We are receiving a lot of investment from whole country, whole planet. So many different groups are putting money in the city. So the price of the land arises a lot. And we have a very complicated society because the differences between the rich people and the low-income people is too big. And when you discuss empty spaces, open spaces in the city, you are trying to fight against the real estate. Because when they saw empty spaces, they saw the opportunity to build, to make money, and to make more buildings. And as you today, I think it was Oliver who said that building is not necessary to densify the city. You can have a lot of buildings, but a low-density city. And we have exactly this case in São Paulo. It's a very spread city with a lot of buildings, but it's not a dense city. So we have to discuss with the government, because with this spread city, the public policy stimulates the buy cars. We have a lot of cars factory. Our last president, Lula, was a worker in cars industries. So they stimulate all the population to buy your own car. It's a dream. When you watch TV, most of the advertisement in the TV are trying to invite you to buy cars. You have to buy cars. There's some new buildings in São Paulo which has one apartment, 8 or 10 places to park your cars, because they try to avoid, limit the use of the cars, establish a kind of rodízio, I don't know how to say it in English. You can't use the car if the number of your car is 7. There's a day you can't use your car. So the rich people bought 2 cars. So it's a Brazilian way to lead with this problem. So it's very difficult to find places to put the parks, the areas we have to keep open to lead with the drainage of the rain, because in Sao Paulo rains a lot. We have so many floods, so many problems to the permeability of the soil is completely lost because we built everywhere. And where the real estate is not working, the slums are occupying. And we have to mix the solution with technical discussion and the drawings, the projects, but the social discussion, because in the other hand, we are having, thanks God, we are living in a democracy society. For us, it's not so solved question, because about 20 years ago, we are not electing our president. We are under a dictatorial society. So now, when each government changes, we are trying to lead with the new politicians. They are not. They don't have a good commitment with the social movements, social groups, and all the social groups, you know, on the other hand, not necessarily with the correct flags, the correct words. Most of them are always discussion to solve their problems. They don't have the overview. They are not able to understand the problem of the city. And most of them prefers to live in gated communities without poor people next to them. When we try to put the discussion about open space, public spaces, most of them prefer to close the public space just for them. When you buy any magazine about architecture, landscape architecture in Brazil, most of the projects was done to gated communities, for clubs, for resorts, not necessarily good projects for public spaces as we used to see in Europe, for example. And this discussion, we understand that the university has a challenge to take part of this discussion, establishing a network of different schools. Our schools started, our faculty started to create the postgraduate program in '72, the master, and in '80s was the PhD. So most of the professors studied at FAO. Most of the professors in Brazil studied at FAO. So it's easy to us to connect the other schools, invited them to take part of these discussions. We made workshops in each one of the, today in the network we have almost 30 different cities. We made these workshops in the city, inviting the architects which works in the municipality government, the federal architects which works with environmental discussions in this city, and the students and the professors of each school to discuss together with some of social movements and try to construct a critical mass, a critical discussion which could contribute to the public policies in that city. We don't believe that we can find a solution which could be used in different contexts, because we have so many cities in almost in a desert context situation. They don't have water at all. And in my city, there's too many water. It's a completely different situation. And there are some cities facing huge ambiental problems, even being a small city. It's completely different. The problem they face, the solutions they could adopt from the huge cities like Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Belo Horizonte, or Salvador. So we make these workshops in each city, and each year we are trying to make a huge meeting in one of these cities each year to discuss what each school, which group are achieving that year. It's a network research group, but maybe in the United States or in other countries, it's easy to find groups like that. Maybe, I don't know. But in Brazil, it's the first group which was working in a national scale. And this group face a problem that the private schools don't use to do research. They just produces professionals and sells diplomas. And the public schools have traditional resistance to discuss with the real estate. They prefer to do research without any commitment with the investors or politicians. So both, in our understanding, is wrong. We have to conciliate these two situations. We have to produce good professionals, but we have to sit with the mayors and the investors to discuss what kind of city we are building. And certainly it's not the city we built it now. Sao Paulo have so many problems. Small cities have big problems too. And we think that university could help to face these problems, establishing this kind of network and permanent discussions groups.
Thank you. Well, I think we can continue our world tour and maybe go to Abu Dhabi. I think so far we've been talking in the context of existing cities, and Eric might spend a few minutes talking about the master plan for Masdar city and the way the carbon footprint in this project was targeted as one of the prime principles.
Sure. Before I get into Masdar, I first wanted to say how much I'm enjoying the format today. I think there's a lot of non-design professionals in the room, and perhaps you don't appreciate the great challenge you've presented to design professionals to speak without slides or visual aids. It's very interesting. So Masdar, if you're not familiar with it, is perhaps the first city, it's a planned city, designed from the beginning to be carbon neutral. And for is personally interesting me for this project and for Transolar as well as a practice is that, as Christoph said in the introduction, historically our firm developed working on buildings. And this was the first major project in which we were involved in master planning. In a way, it shaped much of how we've evolved our practice in the last 5 years or so to incorporate master planning in our practice. And many of the lessons that we learned here are what we now take and apply in many other projects. So I'd really like to use Masdar only as an example of the process that we believe is really important in applying on all kinds of projects around the world. The other big part of it being carbon neutral is that it will be, hopefully, perhaps the first livable city, livable urban environment in Abu Dhabi, not a place that's known for livability where everyone gets in their car and runs from an air-conditioned car to an air-conditioned shopping mall to an air-conditioned home and so on. And this is a place that seeks to completely change that relationship with the city. So I'd just like to start by talking a little bit about that idea of outdoor comfort and how it was accomplished at Masdar, which starts with the actual street design. And rather than the huge wide streets that you have in downtown Abu Dhabi, has deliberately very narrow streets with relatively tall buildings relative to street width, because in this very hot climate, the desire is to keep as much sunlight as out of the street as possible. So you always have the opportunity to stand in shade, and so there's no direct sunlight on the buildings. And that alone has a huge impact on the comfort, together with the design of the street grid itself, to keep wind, which it can be over 40 degrees C, it's well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit there, out of the street, because that's warmer than your body and will actually warm your body, and it's not helpful. And use that wind only at night to ventilate the city, to cool the city back down. And the combination of those two primary measures is already, in the small piece that's already built, very effective. It's already measured that compared to downtown Abu Dhabi, where we often hear about urban heat island, and that's one of the worst examples in the world. It can be more than 15 degrees C, which is 27 Fahrenheit, warmer than the kind of the ambient temperature in downtown. And at Masdar, you're already seeing the reverse, where it can regularly be 7 degrees C less, so it's 13 degrees Fahrenheit less than downtown. And that's the sort of the approach to thinking about what is the microclimate of this place in a very deliberate way going to be like, can result in a reality. The other big half of that is that the intent is that thinking about this creating fantastic outdoor space carries on. It's what Gordon was already mentioning, that of carrying that on to indoor space. And the same I really enjoyed in the transportation discussion, the idea that bicycling and so on is not doing it for the sake of carbon emissions and energy efficiency. It's because it's more enjoyable and the better thing to do. It's the same with the approach to energy efficiency at Masdar and most good projects that people are doing around the world. It's about creating a better space which is inherently more comfortable, and you want to be delightful to occupy, and through that you also create something which is very energy efficient. And that's the key to the low carbons approach at Masdar. It would be impossible to build that city at any kind of economic feasibility and have it be zero carbon if you built business as usual in Abu Dhabi today. The first approach is to have extreme low reduction in energy use. So the design intent for the buildings at Masdar is that they use 80% less energy than a typical building built in Abu Dhabi today. And that's often, I feel, especially in the States, we have this perception that you can get there by incremental improvements in technology, building the same kind of buildings we do. We're going to solve it with high-tech glass, better insulation, more efficient of the same kind of mechanical systems, and this is just not the case. There's a dramatically different approach to construction, using exterior shading, which enables you to completely different types of mechanical systems, and those measures are reinforced by the city design itself. That's another message I want to make sure is clear, is thinking about all of these different scales. It's not just the city scale, it's the relationship of the city scale to the scale of the buildings and what the energy consumption of the buildings will be, and then taking that down even to the experience inside of an individual space. But what's unique about Masdar is it focused not only on the energy consumption of the buildings, but also did include traffic, urban equipment, even water treatment, basically everything that consumed energy or produced CO2 in the city. In that case, with the exception of embodied energy, because at the time the project was starting, it was just too much to take on to be able to analyze that as well. That's a super rapidly evolving field. But coming back to the discussion of energy, only after all of those dramatic energy reductions are done can you then begin to think about what is the right energy source, which was what we always hear the emphasis on. What is the new energy sources going to be? Only after those efficiency measures are accomplished can you decide on the source. In the case of Masdar, it's PV. But I was really glad that Johanna already mentioned district energy of all different kinds, because usually the process is to decide how low can we go, how efficient can these buildings be, and then what really impacts the city scale is what will the energy source for this city be, what kind of district energy systems are we going to look at. And if you design those for the buildings you're building today, you would never be able to afford them. But if you design them for the buildings you plan to build tomorrow, they can become much smaller. It may be that the right energy source is different, and you have to consider what kind of buildings are we going to build and how that's going to come back to the level of planning. So those are the big lessons that we learned from Masdar, and since then, we've been taking that and applying it in many other places throughout the world, including places like Oman, kind of going broader and broader afield. We worked on the low-to-no competition in Helsinki, in Toronto, in Boston, in Dallas, and at different scales at developments of 4 blocks, entire neighborhoods, or entire cities. And the approach is always the same, thinking about how does the intent for the urban form influence access or protection from wind, for comfort indoors and outdoors? How does it affect access to solar energy and or daylight? And a good example being that if you set height limitations, yet still expect density, it's going to result in buildings with big footprints where you bury a lot of people in the center of the buildings and they won't have access to daylight. So simple planning guidelines end up resulting in buildings which will inherently be less delightful and more energy consuming because they don't have access to daylight. And then looking at the building energy use that could result from those basic planning principles, and then coming back to the larger scale of what the energy supply would be. It's the last thing that I'd like to highlight is what's missing for me, and we've had varying success in these projects, is and this is why it's so exciting to be here, is the policies for actually implementing these plans. Because I believe we're not the only ones. Many design professionals see a huge gap between intent and actual implementation. And there's a lot of good plans of people intending to do something and saying this is how it can be done, but the actual path to implementation, whether it's fiscal of how do you actually pay for this, policy-wise, or what are the policies to require it, or from my experience in Chicago, even bureaucratically, who are the people that will understand this plan and make sure it's implemented? It's a huge gap, because a lot of the times planning is only done by planning departments, which have relatively non-technical staff. Sorry, speaking from an engineer's perspective, relatively non-technical staff. And we're talking about a lot of things that are fairly technical, and if we really want to make sure that they're done, then you have to make sure you have technical staff that are able to accomplish those as well. And I think there's a lot of plans where that piece is just not being thought through us now. The very last, I guess, shout out that I want to give is just to point out that we're not crazy, that there are other people thinking about this. Is the new report from Urban Green in New York outlining a plan to reduce carbon emissions for New York City by 90% by 2050. And it shows this exact same approach, that you have to tackle the buildings and get extreme energy efficiency, something very different from what we see today, as the first piece, and then look at the energy supply. And they've done a good job of presenting one vision of what that would be like for New York. So I'll conclude with that.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, I think the time is progressing. So before we open it up to to you to ask questions to our panelists, I just wanted to make one more point, which is also regarding the hurdles and the obstacles that we're experiencing. Like you talked about the policies and the bureaucracy, but I also think that there's a human factor involved, and I have the experience in my practice that you can develop a very advanced, let's say, systems approach to a building. But if the people don't know how to use those systems, the value is reduced probably by half. So there's also an educational aspect involved that needs to be created to make this work. I always think it needs to be made more competitive. In LA we have a group of architects and we're all driving the Toyota Prius, not to make any advertising. But it has become a sport to figure out who can be more fuel efficient with their Prius. So you start looking at your little monitor and you're starting to figure out how you can be more efficient in your driving habits. So with this, I would like to open it up to the audience with questions to our panelists. Is there any questions? Something back there?
Yes. How much did you learn from traditional building practices and urban planning practices in that region in your plan?
Actually, the entire narrow street concept is what is traditional there. So I would say quite a bit. It's really a mixture of old practices when it comes to especially form and the urban outdoor experience. Even the piece of Masdar that is built has a wind tower, which would be a fairly traditional device, but then application of new technology where it fits with those traditional practices.
Mm-hmm. That's a question over here.
I'd like to pick up on the moderator's point about educating building owners. It seems to me that you can have, and perhaps you can comment on this from your experience, the whole issue of you build a building and it's very energy efficient, and then the owner will, or tenants will leave lights on or turn on conditioning systems when they're not supposed to. How does one overcome that kind of a barrier?
Gordon? That's a great question. Maybe Gordon has thoughts on this as well, but I would say that first is to create buildings which are inherently low energy, so that even if you use the building or misuse the building, you will stay comfortable. A second point for me, picking up on Christoph's point, is when it comes to asking people to engage with the building, how do they use it? You have features that you want them to use. I'm personally very interested in, we see it in a lot of our own work, of expressing that through design, so that you create a design which is interesting. This is what Apple is so good at, right? And we don't do this in our buildings at all. You create something which is so interesting and delightful to hold and use, but it's part of the building. So here's this shade, and I want to go and use that because it's such a great thing. But we don't generally see that in buildings today. And there is a certain amount of education on the building owner, and especially I would suggest having at least one person on the building owner who really understands all of the design intent, and having them communicate on a regular basis with the building occupier as well. There's a great study by the Center for Built Environment at Berkeley on indicator lights for windows that are supposed to tell you when to open your windows for natural ventilation. And the conclusion is everyone ignores them everywhere, except for in the buildings where the building management regularly engage with the building occupants and reminds them what they're supposed to be doing.
Mm-hmm. There was another question over here.
My name is Ronde from the Technical Research Center of Finland. Two of the panelists mentioned district energy applications. Mr. Gill from Chicago, he was looking at 450 buildings or something like that, and their interconnectedness also. So I was wondering, did you look at that option also?
Absolutely. Chicago has district cooling, district heating systems throughout the city. So when we look at the entire package of what it takes to look at for a city to perform, it's everything. It's all the different types of renewable or existing, and I'll pick up on something Christoph asked me to mention, which I forgot, but transportation, waste, water, open space. We actually developed a script that we have now used for numerous planning projects that we're doing around the world that help us to determine things like what you're talking about with wind behavior and thermal issues, but also the interrelationships between buildings and people. So, the reflectivity of glass and the thermal aspects of shade and shadow, winter shadows versus what kind of public spaces are best suited in certain areas. In Chicago, we have one interesting feature, which is a series of tunnels that were underneath the city, existing for decades, used to move coal and things through to the buildings. And we adapted that space for vacuum tube waste as well. So there is no stone left unturned when you're looking at getting to some of the goals and targets that we're all talking about up here.
Mm-hmm. I think we're allowed one more question, I'm hearing. So.
Hi, I'm Indra Klein. I'm a development consultant working primarily with the underserved. With regard to policy and implementation, what suggestions would you give HUD in public-private projects, particularly with multi-purpose buildings?
Me? or anybody? That's a great question. I've seen many projects that have gone through that system, and I guess I would look at this is a big question to answer. But I guess I would look at the policy issues that have proven results, and I think this is very abstract answer maybe, but I find that in many cases investments are being made that are not genuinely, the intent is right and the process is there to get to a certain point, but the results don't necessarily yield the original intention of the goal. And I think that the follow through is critical. So I think that you should look at certain key performance indicators that can drive the KPIs that we had at Masdar when we were doing the work down there. I think you have the targets, you have the goals, and you have some kind of system that ensures that those targets are going to be met. And for us, we call them gateway services. That's what we do for all the master plans that we do, because we don't care what people say. What we actually care about is what you're going to do. So at the end of the day, we all have plans, but very few are seen to be realized. And I think that's the key.
Can we have one more question?
No one has spoken on lead. Maybe it's very interesting.
Yeah. One question over there in the back.
Hi. In regard to Masdar, I'm assuming the primary source of energy is solar. But
Yes.
you have complementary sources. But how are you dealing with the solar storage issues? Or is there just so much sun in Abu Dhabi that you don't
Masdar
need
is net zero on an annual basis. There's very few, perhaps no city I know that's planned right now, because that's basically an unsolved problem that is disconnected from the grid. So it's still grid connected. However, you have the advantage that, okay, you have night in Abu Dhabi, so you have to make it through the night. But you can, whereas in many other climates, you have to make it through a net zero on an annual basis. It is perhaps more of a net daily basis there. But there is no major storage component.
Yeah. Okay, I think this concludes our session for now. I think this topic has a lot of facets and a lot of components that we were not able to discuss today, but I hope that it at least sparked some additional thoughts about the challenges that we face in the future. I would like to thank our panelists.
Thank you, Christoph, and panelists as well, and thank everyone who spoke this morning. I just want to remind you all, we now are at the appointed lunch hour. There's food and drink outside, and you're welcome to take that where you will. But we would like to begin promptly at 1:30, just in 55 minutes from now. We have panel number 3, Adaptation and Renewal in Shanghai, Mexico City, and New York, followed by our second keynote on ecological urbanism, and following that there's a reception. A lot of this day is structured for networking, discussion, informal conversation. Please take advantage of these free moments. We'll see you at 1:30.